Hello, it's Silver, and this time I'm looking at something a bit smaller in between higher profile releases, given the number of those we're getting since it's the end of the year-ish. Lords of Ravage is a turn-based roguelite RPG with a strategy layer somewhat reminiscent of something like Darkest Dungeon, but not trying to be much like that game directly. It's a pretty tough game on normal mode and up, in my opinion, and it has a pretty solid amount of content for its price. The main conceit here is that you are the final boss. You play as the overarching villain of the story, and venture throughout the world to complete your villainous schemes. You'll amass an army and raise a small castle while you explore various maps, getting stronger and searching for your next objective. Each map is a decent size, with loads of optional nodes to complete to enhance yourself and your army, and several story nodes that will be tough battles. After enough of those, you'll transition to a new map. There seems to be 3 maps for each campaign, with a tiny 4th one that's dedicated to the final boss encounter only. The game's presentation is sort of a mixed bag, with a pretty cool art style, but a messy interface that holds it back a bit. The art is going for the 2.5D thing, where the world is made up of pixely 3D environments, but all characters and creatures are 2D sprites. I'll admit, I'm kind of a sucker for this style. I know there are plenty of people that don't like it, or find it ugly, but I enjoy it. The game does make the most of it by doing zooms and pans at the beginning of combat to give you a view of the environment, and there's usually a good amount of clutter in the backgrounds. They have some dynamic movement to them, like background characters and fires and stuff, and they usually close in the edges with buildings, boxes, and wagons and stuff, so that you don't get the effect of having loads of empty space to the sides. Interior areas look nice too, with walls hemming them in and rugs, tapestries, and clutter filling the space. I think the first final boss arena has a really nice look to it, being a ruined ancient palace with lots of open windows letting the light in. It means that there's a decent number of possible arenas to fight in, and that helps to keep the combat sections from looking too repetitive. The only downside is that sometimes the clutter items like crates and stairs aren't placed correctly and float in the air, which looks a little silly. The sprites look pretty great, I think. They're where most of the work went when it comes to the visuals. There's like an impressive number of them for your army, as well as all the enemies and stuff, and their animations are quite smooth and have a good amount of frames to them. Things like clothing details and weapons are well sprited out and look nice, and there's a good use of color on them to show their faction easily. In fact, I'd say that it goes farther than just color, and that faction units have certain visual themes that make it clear what faction they belong to at a glance, because they all share them. Barald's corrupt knights are all armored in dark metal plate. The nature guys have wooden weapons and loose green garments, and the dimensional beings will have purple skin with strange gold accents and thin, wicked-looking weapons. I love it when a game gives its factions a unique visual identity like this, and it shows the amount of work put into the sprites of the units was well placed. Particle effects are also pretty nice. These are important because they're one of the prime ways to add impact and satisfaction to a combat system that's turn-based. You ideally want the attacks and spells you're using to look powerful, and I'd say this game manages that for the most part, although I will admit some effects seem kinda mismatched for the attack they're related to, and some are also a bit muddy and indistinct at times, especially on the combat maps with darker lighting. I do really like how your main character has an entrance effect before they show up, like a big fog rolls in. It really drives home the fact that you are the main villain. The music does its job, I'd say, but none of it really stuck with me. It's fitting dark fantasy horns and drums and has a certain plotting evil sound to it, which is also fitting considering you're the bad guy in this setting. I think the farther you get into a run, the better the music becomes, because you start hearing some new tracks that are more climactic and apocalyptic for the final battles. I think if I'm playing the villain, I want an ominous orchestra to be following me around, and although this doesn't quite reach those heights, it does a fine job of fitting into your evil conquest. The interface, though, is where things get a bit messy. Parts of it are totally fine, but others are a bit off. Considering this game has a strategy layer, a board to travel on, and several menus you'll be in a lot, they definitely feel like they could use a bit more love. The map you'll be traveling on, for instance, it has a nice effect applied to the edges, but the areas you travel between aren't very clear. There's a road with blank nodes to show you how places connect, but it's really hard to see, and in areas where there are loops or intersections of this road, it's basically impossible to tell which directions it goes in. It's common to click a new destination that looks like it should be like 1 step over, but is actually like 6 steps around the road backwards, and you can't tell until you click it. This is a big problem since the game gets harder with every step. The map is too indistinct and the ways in which the nodes connect seem completely arbitrary and not clear at all. The way each menu is a new window that pops up over the last is also odd. This means that things get kind of silly with visibility. For instance, when you go to the upgrades menu, it shows you the knowledge cost of each upgrade, except the character and upgrade menus, which are open at the same time, actually cover up the knowledge total in the upper left of the screen, which means in order to upgrade things, you have to cover up the currency you're upgrading with and can't see how much you actually have the whole time. Recruiting units is done on a straight line that you have to scroll through because you can only see 2 of them at a time, rather than putting them on a grid or something more helpful. Your units are just in a big list that seemingly can't be organized in a specific way, like say by faction or by remaining health. Some windows can be closed by pressing the buttons that opened them again, others can't. Some can be closed by clicking the main window behind them, others can't. In battle, things get in the way of readability quite often. Because of the shallow angle the camera is at, units' weapons will block the info of nearby units. And a unit's weapon sort of dangling in front of the above unit's health and power, so you can't see them, happens quite a bit. When summoning new units, you have to drag them into circles on the battlefield, but the camera angle means your own interface can block off parts of the circles, making it harder to place things there. Sometimes units just physically block other ones, making them hard to click. Your spellcasting interface at the bottom actually gets in the way of things, and you can't click behind it, only above it. Playing this game involves a fair bit of battling the interface at various times. It's just not super well designed and frequently gets in the way of itself. All of these problems are solvable with a bit of extra design updating, but it means that in its current state, it can be a bit frustrating at times when you have to fight with the interface just to do simple things that should be easier. I think the standout here is the visual style and sprite work. It's the thing that stays with you and has a solid presentation. The other aspects are somewhat weaker and can cause problems during a run. The gameplay is split between the strategy layer of recruiting units, exploring the map, and upgrading stuff, and the combat layer. You'll start by choosing your villain. There are 3 total, but you'll have to unlock the other 2. Each character is very different in how they play and what faction they form an alliance with. They also each have 2 different styles that you can choose from before starting. Each one is like a playstyle guideline, kinda. A set of passives and bonuses that exemplify one aspect of that character and how they work mechanically. There are also 5 difficulties, which mostly affect things like the Menace mechanic and enemy stats. On the map, you'll start with a few units and resources, and everything after this point is up to you. Hiring units is an important part of what you'll do. You have something called a Dark Alliance, which are faction units that you can hire at any time. They're not cheap, but usually strong and can also be upgraded. Only units you have an alliance with can be directly hired and upgraded. Even if you find another unit of your faction, you still can't upgrade them until you form an alliance with them. Alliances are formed at random on some map nodes. You can also hire a random unit from outside of your faction. It starts out cheaper, but advances every time you use it. You have no control of what you'll get, but it can basically be anything from any faction other than yours. All units have an active skill or 2, sometimes some passives, and always something called a disposable passive. These trigger something to happen upon that unit's death, and unit damage is persistent between battles, by the way, as well as their deaths being permanent. This is why hiring is so important. You'll need to bolster your injured units and replace fallen ones with fresh recruits. As you travel, you'll sometimes get a resource called Forbidden Knowledge. This can be spent on unit upgrades. Every alliance unit has a little skill tree that lets you upgrade their skills in different ways, as well as offering powerful passive choices that are usually mutually exclusive. Unit upgrades are not individual. They affect all current and future units of that type during a run. Traveling along the map, you'll find various nodes to visit. Click on one and you'll be presented with a situation and a choice of what to do, each one having different rewards and sometimes costs. Weirdly, it tells you what a node will do before you visit it, but it only tells you the first option. Each node usually has anywhere from 2 to 4 options, so this little tip is only telling you a fraction of what can actually happen there. You'll want to visit lots of these for resources, new units, and alliances, and some other things like edicts and relics. It has a sort of fog of war effect, where you can only tell what nodes are nearby when you progress and uncover them. Sometimes there'll be combat nodes to hit. These are of course a drain on your army, but they give army XP. With every level your army goes through, they'll get a global health and power increase, so you definitely want to build this up. Eventually you'll find a golden node with a beam of light coming from it. These are the story nodes, which will show a cutscene to advance the story and present you with a much harder battle than most combat nodes. After you do all of these on a map, you'll automatically travel to the next one, and it'll be refreshed and unexplored. This means you should always do all nodes you want to do before hitting the story fights, as you can't go back to the previous map once you advance. In combat, you'll start by placing 3 of your units on the field. You draw a random hand of several choices from your total army, and redraw a new hand every time you place one. Some units have a gold star next to them. These are elite units, and you can usually only have 1 of those on the battlefield. There are 5 total spaces to put people in, and frontal units do guard rear units, kind of. It seems many enemies can hit wherever they want, even if they're not ranged, and many enemies also have an AoE attack or two that hits everyone, so the row system doesn't really do much for you. You'll also be able to choose a relic when you start. These often have significant effects, but are situational, so deploying them at the right time is important. On the 3rd and 6th turns, you'll be able to place 1 more unit and choose another relic, and you can also replace a dead unit at the beginning of your next turn. You also have those cards down there at the bottom of the screen. Those are edicts. These are spells that you can collect and draw a hand of each turn. You have edict points that they cost to use, and you usually get 2 of these per turn by default. Edicts can be pretty strong, and there are some characters who specialize more in using them. They can also be upgraded up to level 3 for knowledge outside of battle to enhance their effects. Each unit has a number of AP they can hold and a number they regen each turn. You use these to cast their skills, although some also have charges and cooldowns. Cooldowns are self-explanatory, but charges don't regen naturally once you spend them until the next battle starts. There are some skills and edicts that can restore charges, though. You can use each unit in any order you want until there's no more AP left on the board, and then the enemy gets to beat you up. They can reinforce with new units basically whenever they want, and the battle is won only when you've carved through all of them. Like I mentioned, damage your army takes is persistent, so it's often a good idea to have several of each of your mainline fighters, that way you can rotate them out as they take damage. At any point you want, you can click the "I'm through with you guys" button, and all of your units will withdraw. Then your main character will stroll up to the battlefield and do it themselves. Your villain has much more health and power than anyone else in your army, and several skills to use which are very powerful. They also have something called an escalation passive, where every other turn the passive triggers and they get even stronger in some way. I think it's meant to mimic the idea of being a multi-phase boss fight. You're strong enough to take down entire armies by yourself and quite satisfying to play, but keep in mind that all the damage you take stays with you and can eventually take you down if you let it build up. Obviously, if this character dies, then the run is over. You also can't put your units back on the field as far as I know. Once you summon the boss, you have to beat the combat with them. There's no going back. Roguelites usually have something called an attrition mechanic. This is something that makes the game more dangerous as you go. This game has 2. I already mentioned the obvious one, damage is permanent for everyone, but there's also a second one in the form of the Menace mechanic. On normal mode, every step you take on the map builds up 3% Menace, even if it's a blank node. For every 1% of it, your enemies get 1% more health and attack power, so it can quickly build up to become a huge threat. To be honest, I kinda hate mechanics like this. Some sort of curse that builds up over time and makes things harder. The main problem with them to me is since it builds up on every step, you are guaranteeing that things get much harder pretty quickly, but I'm not guaranteed to have gotten any stronger during those steps, which means oftentimes these mechanics make things super strong and spongy real fast, and the only way to keep up is to get really lucky RNG and find something very strong as fast as you can. This is compounded by a few things. One is the map problem I mentioned earlier, where you can't tell how many steps any given node is going to be, so you can build up like 12% more difficulty just trying to get to the next space without knowing that would happen. The other thing is, you don't know where the story node is until you get close to it, which means you can build up huge amounts of Menace and not find it. Then you have to go all the way back across the map and build up even more just to get back on track and to try to find this hidden node you need to progress. There were several times I basically maxed out the gauge simply by exploring in the wrong direction without knowing and having to go all the way back. Of course, this means that those steps were all empty, so the whole time things were getting harder, I wasn't advancing at all or getting any stronger. You can reduce the Menace you have, but it almost doesn't matter. Rarely you'll find an event that lets you reduce the gauge anywhere from usually around 2 to 6%, which means right after you do it and turn around, all you gotta do is take 2 steps towards your next goal and you've already invalidated the amount that you lowered it. When you complete a map and move on to the next one, it lowers it by 50%, which is much better, and I definitely like that idea, but it doesn't change the fact that it's going to keep ramping up the enemies, usually far faster than I can improve my own army. You'll also be occasionally getting build points, which you can use at a faction-specific base to construct new buildings that have very significant effects on your army. Things like making those mutually exclusive upgrades I mentioned free for every unit. There's another building that lets you have both of them instead of just picking one for your entire army. I do like the building idea. It's a cool character-specific way to give large goals to work for that massively improve your dudes. As you complete the maps, the story missions will go from tough fights to actual boss fights, some with multiple phases. And these are easily the best parts of the game for me because they let you apply all the upgrades and tricks you've learned into a big battle that decides everything. You'll also get memory shards sometimes, especially for beating the final boss. These are your meta progression currency. You use these on the character select screen to unlock more units to hire, more edicts to find, and more relics to try. Lords of Ravage is a fun roguelite that's also a bit rough around the edges. It has lots of variety where it counts, but it also has interface issues that keep it from excellence. For only $10 though, I think you'll have a good time if you've liked what you saw here, especially if you get on better with those types of attrition mechanics than I do. I'll be sure to put the Steam link down below if you'd like to check it out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.